At 02:15 hours local time on January 21, 2026, the AN-MPQ-64 Sentinel radar at Asad Airbase registered a digital anomaly. 12 low-RCS contacts bloomed on the scope simultaneously, originating from the border region near Iran. They weren't flying in a formation found in any flight manual. They were moving as a single, chaotic fluid mass at an altitude of just 40 meters, hugging the terrain contours like oil flowing over water. The target sitting on the tarmac was a $115 million AC-130J Ghostrider, its crew performing a hot refueling operation with 30,000 pounds of aviation fuel, exposing the airframe's vascular system to the open air. The radar operator didn't see drones. He saw 12 mathematical probabilities of destruction closing at 185 kilometers per hour. There was no declaration of war, no radio warning, just the physics of mass times velocity heading toward a very expensive aluminum box filled with combustible liquid. On paper, the defense grid at Al-Assad was impregnable. The primary kinetic effector was the Centurion C-RAM, a terrifying piece of engineering that mounts a 20mm Vulcan cannon on a heavy truck chassis. It fires 75 rounds every single second, filling the air with self-destructing tracer rounds designed to turn incoming threats into confetti. US air defense doctrine states that a single Centurion can handle a saturation attack of 4 simultaneous vectors with a 98% kill probability, but the radar screen showed 12. The attacking force consisted of upgraded Shahed-238s, trading the noisy moped engine of their predecessors for a micro turbojet. They weren't just loitering munitions, they were cheap cruise missiles built with off-the-shelf electronics. This created a nightmare scenario of cost asymmetry. The C-RAM burns through $30,000 of ammunition in a 10-second burst. The drones cost less than that to build, but the real problem wasn't money, it was geometry. The Centurion's radar tracks multiple targets, but the gun has to mechanically turn to face each one. It's a serial process in a parallel world. To kill all 12, the gun would need 22 seconds of perfect firing time. The drones would cross the kill zone in 14. The computer knew it, the operators knew it. The only ones who didn't care were the machines. At 6 kilometers out, the swarm underwent cellular division. 4 of the Shahed-238s pitched up, climbing aggressively to 400 meters. Their jet turbines spooled to maximum RPM, creating an infrared bloom so bright it looked like a second sun to the thermal sensors below. These 4 were the martyrs. Their programming was crude, loud, and intentionally suicidal. They were designed to scream, "Look at me!" to the C-RAM's fire control algorithms. They were the magician's left hand, waving a bright red handkerchief to command the audience's attention, while the Centurion's turret slewed upward to track. These high contrast targets, the remaining 8 drones did something terrifyingly disciplined. They cut their throttles to 60% and dropped, not just low, but absurdly low, 15 meters off the deck. At that altitude, they ceased to be aircraft in the eyes of the radar and became part of the background noise. They tucked themselves behind the radar shadow created by the earthen blast berm surrounding the fuel depot. To the digital brain of the Sentinel radar, the bottom 8 contacts simply vanished. It wasn't stealth technology, it was the exploitation of the horizon line. The C-RAM was now locked in a mechanical engagement cycle with the high-flying decoys, its logic gate satisfied that it was tracking the threat. Meanwhile, the real kill chain was skimming the rooftops of the barracks, invisible, silent, and closing the distance at 50 meters per second. It was a classic pincer movement, executed not by generals on a map, but by lines of code written in Tehran months ago. At 2:16, the Centurion LPWS, land-based phalanx weapon system, initiated the engagement sequence. The sound wasn't a series of gunshots, it was a continuous, tearing scream, like canvas being ripped by a giant hand. The 6-barrel M61A1 Vulcan cannon spun up to 4,500 rounds per minute, spewing a solid stream of M940 MPT-SD tracers. These aren't standard bullets. Each round carries a self-destruct mechanism that detonates after 2,300 meters to prevent collateral damage on the ground. For the 4 high-flying decoys, the sky became a wall of tungsten and high-explosive incendiary compound. The radar's closed-loop fire control system adjusted the stream in real time, watching the tracers drift and correcting the aim by fractions of a milliradian. The lead decoy didn't stand a chance. A burst of 20 rounds intersected its flight path. The kinetic energy transfer at Mach 3 turned the drone's carbon fiber fuselage into dust. The fuel tank vaporized. It was a perfect, textbook intercept. The Centurion servos whined, snapping to the second decoy, then the third. The system was performing exactly as Raytheon engineers had designed it in a clean lab in Arizona. But the battlefield is not a clean lab. While the cannon was looking up, the 8 low-flying Shaheeds popped up over the berms at a range of 900 meters. This distance is critical. It's known as the minimum reaction envelope. For the Centurion's Ku-band radar to switch tracks from a target at 20 degrees elevation to a target at near zero elevation requires a physical movement of the radar dish and the gun mount. The turret weighs 6,000 kilograms. To swing that mass 180 degrees and depress the barrel takes 1.8 seconds. In human time, that's a blink. In drone time, that's an eternity. The Shaheeds were covering 51 meters every second. By the time the Centurion finished killing the last decoy and began the mechanical slew to the new threat, the lead attackers had closed to 600 meters. The fire control computer was now screaming electronically. It had too many targets and not enough time. It tried to prioritize based on time to impact, but the math was falling apart. The tracking algorithm, designed to predict a smooth ballistic arc, was confused by the ground clutter. Every fence post, every parked truck, and every corrugated metal roof reflected radar energy, creating ghost targets that flickered in and out of existence. The gun finally fired again, depressing its barrel to the limit stop. The stream of tracers lashed out horizontally, just feet above the runway lights. It was a desperate spray, not a precision strike. The Doppler filter was struggling to separate the spinning turbine blades of the drones from the waving palm fronds in the background. It was like trying to read a barcode while sprinting on a treadmill. One low-flying drone clipped a light pole and tumbled, exploding on the taxiway. Another took a glancing hit to its wing but kept flying, its autopilot fighting the asymmetry with brute force control inputs. The remaining 6 were now inside the 400-meter dead zone. The Centurion stopped firing. It had to. The target geometry was now so close that the gun couldn't depress any further without shooting its own radar housing. The machine had done its job perfectly, and it had failed completely. The lead Shahed-238 didn't aim for the cockpit. It aimed for the center of mass, the starboard wing root where the main fuel bladder connects to the engines. At 0217, impact occurred. The 50-kilogram high-explosive warhead detonated inside the wing structure. The physics were absolute. The explosion didn't just tear the metal, it atomized the fuel. 30,000 pounds of JP-8 aviation fuel transitioned from liquid to expanding gas in 4 milliseconds. The resulting overpressure wave snapped the C-130's spine like a dry twig. The fireball was visible from low Earth orbit. Ground temperature at the epicenter spiked to 1200 degrees Celsius instantly. Aluminum alloys lose their structural integrity at 660 degrees. The airframe didn't just burn, it liquefied. The AC-130J, the Angel of Death, a platform capable of leveling city blocks, was reduced to a puddle of molten alloy and burning composite in the span of a single heartbeat. There was no time for damage control. There was no time to evacuate. The aircraft simply ceased to exist as a functional machine. But the destruction of the gunship was just the opening move. The logic of the attack was ruthless. The first wave was the breach. The Centurion was now useless, its barrels glowing cherry red, dangerously overheated, its ammunition drums empty after the desperate spray. Its sensors were blinded by the massive thermal wash of the burning wreckage. The base was effectively naked, And that's when the Sentinel radar updated again. A second wave! Not 12 drones this time, 24. Closing from the south at 200 kilometers per hour. The escalation ladder had broken. The US defense doctrine relied on the assumption that for every cheap arrow, they had an expensive shield. But the shield was heavy, slow, and out of bullets. The arrow was cheap, plentiful, and relentless. Conventional kinetics had failed. Sending a $4 million Patriot missile to intercept a $30,000 drone wasn't just economically unsustainable. At this range, it was physically impossible. The base commander had 0 options left in the standard playbook. The next impact was calculated for 02 minutes 18 seconds 00. The math said they were already dead. In a standard war, this is where the air raid sirens wail and people write farewell letters. But the US military had anticipated the math of swarm warfare. They knew they couldn't shoot their way out of this equation with lead and propellant, so they decided to change the variables. Sitting innocuously near the perimeter fence was a standard 20-foot shipping container. No spinning turrets, no missile tubes, just a flat matte black panel antenna pointed at the horizon. This was THOR, Tactical High Power Operational Responder. The operator inside didn't grip a joystick or look through an optical sight. He simply toggled a safety switch and pressed enable. The system didn't roar like the C-RAM. It hummed, a deep electrical vibration that you felt in your teeth rather than heard. Inside the container, a massive capacitor bank dumped stored energy into a magnetron the size of a beer keg. The result was a burst of high-power microwave (HPM) energy focused into a wide, invisible conical beam. Here is where the physics shifted. Bullets travel at Mach 3. Missiles travel at Mach 4. The beam from THOR traveled at the speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second. There was no lead time calculation, no windage adjustment, no time of flight. The beam didn't try to break the drone's wings or puncture the fuel tank. It ignored the carbon fiber shell entirely and went straight for the copper wiring inside. The physics principle is simple induction. A changing magnetic field induces a current in a conductor. THOR turned every wire inside the Iranian drones into a power source. It was a tsunami of voltage forced into microchips designed for 5 volts. This wasn't kinetic violence, it was electromagnetic execution. The 24 incoming Shaheeds hit the microwave cone at a range of 1.2 kilometers. To the naked eye, nothing happened. No flash, no bang. But in the electromagnetic spectrum, it was a supernova. Inside the fuselage of every drone, the laws of resistance were being violated. The delicate STM32 microcontrollers and FPGA guidance chips, designed to operate at 3.3 volts, were suddenly subjected to a 5,000 volt surge induced directly into their traces. It wasn't a malfunction. It was an instant lobotomy. The silicon gates inside the processors fused together. NAND flash memory was wiped clean. The code that defined up, down, target, and self was erased in a nanosecond. The result was eerie. There were no fireballs in the sky. One moment the swarm was a coordinated lethal geometric shape. The next, it was just 24 unguided objects obeying the laws of gravity. Control surfaces locked in their last known positions. Engines flamed out as fuel injection maps corrupted. They didn't dive, they tumbled. Like birds suffering simultaneous heart attacks, they fell out of the sky, crashing into the desert floor in a ragged line exactly where the microwave beam had intersected their path. The threat board on the Sentinel radar went from saturation attack to clear in 3.5 seconds. It was the fastest air victory in history, and not a single shot had been fired. The sun rose over Al-Asad, revealing 2 very different kinds of wreckage. Near the runway, the twisted skeletal remains of the C-130J were still cooling, a black scar on the concrete costing the US taxpayer $115 million. But out in the desert, scattered like broken toys, lay 24 intact Shahed-238s. They weren't burned, they weren't shattered. If you opened the maintenance hatch on one, you'd find the engine cold and the wiring harness seemingly perfect. But under a microscope, the story was violent. The microscopic gold bond wires connecting the silicon dies to the package pins had sublimated. The transistors were fused into useless lumps of conductively dead matter. The technical crews that went out to recover the carcasses didn't wear bomb disposal suits. They wore gloves to protect against the lingering static charge. They weren't recovering evidence of a battle, they were recovering evidence of a paradigm shift. The Centurion C-RAM, the pinnacle of 20th century kinetic engineering, had fired 2,400 rounds and failed. THOR had fired a silent beam for 6 seconds and achieved a 100% kill rate. The cost of the electricity used to fry the entire second wave was roughly $1.50, less than the price of a cup of coffee. This wasn't a victory to be celebrated with medals. It was a terrifying glimpse into the future of warfare. The era of shooting expensive missiles at cheap drones is mathematically dead. The new battlefield isn't defined by who has the biggest explosion, but by who controls the electromagnetic spectrum. The Iranian operators in Mehran stared at their blank screens, realizing their swarm hadn't been destroyed, it had simply been turned off. The US had responded not with force, but with a wall of energy that turned their smart weapons into expensive paperweights. The game hasn't just changed, the board has been flipped over. Bye for now.